Hello, I'm Michael Shea in Arlington County.
This is Samantha Clarke, and I am the interim CEO and Chief Operating Officer for Laws, Domestic Violence, and Sexual Assault Services here in Loudoun County.
Thank you for joining us. This is
Behind the Mask.
So Sam, what's the impact been of the pandemic on the ability of laws to continue to serve the community?
Thank you for asking that. There's been a lot of impacts. As we are well aware, a pandemic has had a vast impact and created a lot of challenges on many communities here across the Commonwealth, and it hasn't been any different for Loudoun County. In providing domestic and sexual violence services for those survivors in our community, we've had to be flexible and nimble and adapt over time in a lot of different ways. As we know, a pandemic has required us to navigate changing waters over time. And some examples of that is, right after things sort of shut down in March of 2020, we really had to take a big step back in how we looked at providing services to survivors of intimate partner violence. And one of the ways that we did that is we had to go from providing what we consider congregate or communal shelter to those individuals fleeing imminent danger or fleeing for their lives after an incident of domestic violence. And we still had an obligation to our community to provide safe shelter. And so how did we do that? And one of the things that we did was we were very lucky to be able to provide what we call alternative safe housing to survivors in our community. And that meant that we housed survivors of violence in our community in alternative locations. And so we are still having to do that 2 years later. But that's changed and flexed throughout the last 2 years. But being able to ensure that survivors of violence still have safe housing when fleeing in our community under such conditions has not been easy. It's required critical partnerships. It's required extensive funding. And we're very lucky that we've been able to rely on our funders and our policymakers and our decision makers and our partners to be able to continue to have those resources in our community to do that.
Have you been able to start any new programs during this pandemic?
Absolutely. One of the things I think I'm very proud of is, again, using that word nimble. Survivors continue to need services. And again, after this time of having to kind of close, right, and not do services in person, survivors still need services. And one example of that is our therapy. We provide trauma therapy to survivors of violence. And, the way therapy is traditionally provided, it's come on into the office and see your therapist. And we weren't able to do that initially after the pandemic started. And so what we are doing now is we have been able to provide through, again, resources like telehealth. We've been able to continue providing virtual trauma therapy to our survivors. Now that we're coming out of the pandemic, right, knock on wood, we are looking at the ability to provide hybrid services because survivors have communicated to us that this is a resource. Being able to do virtual telehealth, virtual therapy is a resource that removes barriers to them. They're able to access the trauma therapy they need without maybe having to find transportation or without having to take time off of work. So that's one of the ways that we've been able to adapt and provide different services to our survivors of violence. And so we're really looking forward to be able to continue that in our array of services here at Laws, is to be able to provide that virtual telehealth in addition to the come on into the office and see your therapist approach to providing that trauma therapy. So we're very excited that the pandemic has taught us to be more flexible and nimble in how we provide services to survivors the way they need us to.
Sam, what's the best way for people to get more information and support the great work of Laws?
Absolutely. I always want to direct people to our hotline. If people have questions, if people want to learn about Laws, if people need help, if people want to volunteer, if people want to donate, and they can only remember one number, I want them to call our hotline, and we will direct them where to go and how to get help. And that number is going to be 703-777-6552. If someone needs help, or someone you know wants to help, please call us on our hotline. And I always like to stress, that's a 703 number because we're right here in Loudoun County. Our advocates, our staff, and our agency are right here, and we're part of this community. And again, that number is 703-777-6552. And I welcome you to reach out.
Sam, I want to thank you and your team at Laws for the great work you do in serving the community, and I wish you continued success.
Thank you so much, Michael.